One of the hallmarks of all dictatorships is that they are inherently insecure. Throughout history, the most cruel dictators have rarely been known to retire peacefully and pass in their sleep. And history is littered with the bodies of strongmen who once thought themselves untouchable until they weren't. Recent examples are not hard to find, whether we're talking about Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Saddam Hussein, or Muammar Gaddafi. It is very rare indeed for such men to end happily what began as a path to conquest and glory. And those who start their journeys as instigators often end up as their own final victims. But, you might ask, what about Vladimir Putin? His fate, of course, is not yet known, but we do know the fate of all those in recent history who trod on paths similar to his own. And that future is not very bright. Saddam Hussein, like Putin, once fancied himself a regional conqueror, the man who strove to build a Middle Eastern empire unrivaled by any other in his part of the world. In the process, he oversaw wars of conquest against his neighbors, which resulted in deaths that numbered in the millions. And on the back of all of this suffering, Saddam amassed a vast fortune, estimated to be between $2 billion and $40 billion US dollars. Saddam expected his wealth would last forever, and thought that the history books would welcome him with open arms. Indeed, they did, just not in the way he ever expected. Rather than enjoying his wealth in his old age, Saddam was instead ultimately found covered in dirt, huddled in a hole near a farmhouse, desperately trying to cling to a single duffel bag of cash. Ultimately, he was sentenced to death by his own people. Muammar Gaddafi didn't fare much better. Throughout his illustrious career as the despotic dictator of Libya, a small nation with a population that averaged less than 4.5 million people during his reign, Gaddafi somehow managed to amass a fortune that was estimated by the Los Angeles Times to be worth $200 billion US dollars, with most other sources putting it at least $70 billion. Either way, it was more than the man could ever spend, and Gaddafi truly felt invincible. He was known to flaunt his wealth, even following that bizarre third world dictator trend and toting around a golden gun, like all the other cool kids. But it turns out that flaunting your wealth in a nation of desperately poor people, who you have long exploited, isn't a very good survival strategy. Ultimately, Gaddafi, similar to Saddam, was found in a drain pipe hiding from the very people he had built his wealth by exploiting. Let me know when you spot the trend. And let's just say that the beloved dictator of Libya didn't exactly have a peaceful funeral. What did Gaddafi and Saddam have in common? They both felt rich, powerful, and untouchable, until they didn't. This is a trend among rich dictators, many of whom perish in similar ways, if their own court doesn't take them out long before they even reach the point of widespread fame and notoriety. It's not exactly what you would call a safe business model. And in a world of immensely rich dictators, building their wealth on the backs of desperately poor populations, perhaps none currently takes the cake more than Vladimir Putin. By many accounts, Putin is one of the world's richest men, with a secret, not so secret fortune of several $100 billion US dollars. He even famously owns a massive palace on the Black Sea, complete with illustrious gardens, an indoor hockey rink, and even a very specific type of pole that we can't name here without risking this video's monetization. Yet for all of Putin's wealth, most Russians, outside of those in Russia's major cities, like Moscow and St. Petersburg, are desperately poor. The average Russian's poverty is well disguised in international statistics due to the wealth of Putin and men like him, which overwhelm the national averages and drive them way up. Russia is one of the most unequal societies on Earth. Nearly all of the country's wealth is concentrated among the few lucky Russians who live in Russia's most prosperous cities, and 60 to 70% of Russia's wealth is controlled by just the top 1% of people. For comparison, roughly 30% of the wealth is owned by the top 1% in the United States, although just because they're not doing as bad as Russia doesn't necessarily mean they themselves are doing a good job. Back to the point, infrastructure in Russia is poor. Outside of the major metropolitan areas, there are few roads linking the Russian population together. And while it may be difficult to believe, about a fifth of Russia's population even lacks access to things as simple as indoor toilets. Meanwhile, Putin and his oligarchs often rest easy on literal golden toilet seats. The point is, the concentration of wealth in Russia is so high that it is reaching critical levels where, historically, nations, or at least regimes, often crumble into the dust. And that's even without major active wars being fought on top of all of this inequality and contributing to it even further. But how will Vladimir Putin meet his end? And is it actually likely, or even possible, that he could have his own Gaddafi moment? This question will certainly be hotly debated in the comments section, but one person who is not debating it is Vladimir Putin. He himself certainly thinks that this is a very valid possibility. Since he first came to power as Russia's political leader and strongman, Putin has been cleaning house, a task it seems that is never quite finished. As a former KGB agent, Putin of course knows better than just about anybody how to make people around him disappear. And he also knows how to lie through his teeth about it. With these skills in the background, Putin's more than 20-year reign as Russia's president has certainly been bathed in blood. The kind of blood that doesn't reveal strength, but rather paranoia, and the fear of losing one's position. Some recent occurrences have been well publicized. There are, of course, the plentiful examples of Russian oligarchs and high-ranking government officials who have died under unexplained or suspicious circumstances since the start of Russia's war against Ukraine. While exact numbers vary due to ongoing investigations, and the fact that such deaths are usually made to look natural and kept as secret as possible, current estimates suggest that at least several dozen prominent Russians have recently met their fate in this way. This number is so high as to make it impossible that all of these deaths were actually due to natural causes or mere accidents, which isn't really a surprise to anybody who's been paying attention. Presumably, these high-ranking Russians, who could threaten Putin, have just happened to find their way to compromised cups of tea, or have accidentally tripped out of 10th-story windows. A classic example of a paranoid dictator taking out the potential competition before they become a threat. Not the kind of thing you do if you feel totally secure in your power. Then there are, of course, more prominent and more specific examples. Alexei Navalny, the popular Russian opposition figure, garnered much support among the Russian people in his presidential campaign against Putin. Then, he famously died under suspicious circumstances in a Russian prison on February 16, 2024. He was considered the strongest political opponent to Putin in all of Russia, and was famously poisoned by the Russian government at least once, still bravely choosing to return home to Russia to continue his campaign, culminating in the arrest and imprisonment that led to his death. And of course, we cannot forget Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, responsible for many Russian victories in Ukraine, who famously turned on Russia's military leadership and led a military march against Moscow. Prigozhin's troops engaged in limited combat against Russian aerial forces, by definition, a true Russian civil war. Then, all of a sudden, the coup fizzled out. Likely, this was because not enough Russians joined the cause, as the coup was early in the war when pro-Putin sentiment was still strong. Prigozhin then, unsurprisingly, died in a plane crash not long after, deemed another accident. Why the Kremlin even tried to hide this one as an accident is anyone's guess, but I guess to be a true master pathological liar, you need to get your reps in every chance you can get. Both of these eliminations showed Putin's weakness, and both in different categories, because you don't eliminate people who you aren't afraid of. Prigozhin showed Putin's top-down weakness arising among Russia's military leadership, and Navalny showed Putin's bottom-up weakness arising from a movement of the people. Both are things that Vladimir Putin deeply fears, and what most people miss when overwhelmed by the details of the present, which causes them to forget the numerous examples that history has to offer of men just like this, is that constant shows of force and constant political assassinations show not how strong a regime really is, but instead how weak it actually believes itself to be. Such leaders are forced to constantly give their attention to snuffing out every threat at the source before those threats can grow real, like King Herod killing all of the baby boys in Little Bethlehem. What then is the source of Putin's profound insecurity? Part of the problem is that, as it's been said, it's lonely at the top. When you reach the pinnacle of success in a society like Russia, where you control all of the wealth and all of the power, you make yourself a target for anyone and everyone who wants a piece of what you have. Nobody understands this more than Vladimir Putin. And the great irony is that such men usually grow more and more in fear the older they get, when they should be enjoying their spoils. This is the phenomenon that creates powerful state security services like the KGB, which all too often focus on threats from their own people as much as, or more than, threats from outside the homeland. And unfortunately for Vladimir Putin, the worst thing you can do as a leader in such a vulnerable position is to display weakness. Putin has been doing a lot of that lately, despite his strongman persona in front of the cameras. Russia's war against Ukraine has been a disaster, moving Russia from being perceived as one of the world's great military powers to now being seen by most as little more than a formerly powerful backwater. The Russian economy is also in shambles, with several different crises simmering all at once, each of which could independently bring the country's financial system down. All of these things are creating frustration among the Russian people, and especially among Russia's elites, who are used to easy power and prosperity, and who don't like the idea of their easy money or comfortable lives going away. Somewhere in the wings, there is no doubt an ambitious man, like Putin himself once was, eager for his position. And with each of Putin's failures, the chances of a coup or a rebellion grow. This is why Vladimir Putin has responded to his failures in Ukraine with such decisive aggression against the Russian elites, disappearing as many as he can to hopefully send a message. And this is also why Putin has gone after his own people with tough police crackdowns and long prison sentences for simply protesting his war. But the problem is that once you start applying that kind of pressure, you can never stop, and you can never catch your breath. And despite Putin's best efforts, as the Russian people's situation only gets worse and worse, more and more of them may eventually be willing to take a stand against the Putin regime. At some point, the risk of inaction becomes greater than the risk of action. But at what point might things tip over, giving Putin his Gaddafi moment? Well, no one can say exactly. Prigozhin's coup came out of nowhere and disappeared almost as quickly. Another similar movement could certainly arise and take the world by surprise. Revolutions are never obvious until they're already happening. The cracks start small: an economic downturn, a lost war, a frustrated elite. But when the dam finally breaks, there's no putting it back together. Right now, to many, Putin still seems personally invincible, but history teaches us that this is often the case until it isn't. And we know that every dictator of Putin's caliber in recent history has met a similar end. But what do you think? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to join us for future videos on world events.